Good news, everyone. Today we're talking about food. We are going to go over menu planning and meal prep and finally the systems of food. This is Ask Briar, the show where you get to ask a follow-up question. And I am Briar Harvey. This is my very first show on Helium After Dark, and I am very excited for all of my new listeners who are joining me. I don't know how many of you there are, but it's very exciting. Okay. This show is kind of a question and answer. Sometimes I have live guests. Sometimes I just take the questions that get sent to my inbox and turn them into segments and ramble, which is exactly what I'm going to be doing today. You can find out more on my website at briarharvey.com/askbriar. All right. So let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the systems of food, and there's a lot when we're talking about food and what goes into food and how we all interact with food. Mostly the questions that I get asked about food have to do with how I feed my ravaging hordes of children every single day. So that is mostly what we're going to be looking at. I have 3 kids. I have homeschooled them all since before it was cool. And kids eat a lot of fucking food, man. I cannot really articulate to you how much food children consume, especially when they are not going anywhere, like school, to offset not just cost, but also just the general levels of consumption. So when my daughter was about 6 and we started homeschooling, it was meal planning that I really had to learn. And we had a okay budget. We've had various levels of food budget over the years, and there is a lot of privilege in food, which I will get to later. But I had a reasonable budget to feed 3 people who ate a lot of food. And meal planning became like this holy grail for me because my daughter was 6, so it was about early mid 2000s, and there were this preponderance of Christian and mom blogs that I would go to and look at to find, all of these glorious and elaborate meal plans where we would feed our children all of these wonderful things, because remember, they were home. And I would look at them like they were absolutely batshit insane. There was no way I was going to spend that much time preparing food every single day. It was an unrealistic goal. I will not name names, but I remember one woman in particular who I have now been following for, like 15 years, who I would identify as this side of crazy. And she prepares everything from scratch. There is a heavy focus on fermentation and whole foods, and all of these things are fantastic. Diets aside, especially the more children you typically have allergies to contend with or special food needs. And all of those things have to be included when we are talking about planning our meals. So let's get down and dirty into what actually works for meal planning when there's children afoot and we have fucking lives, because I'm not spending all day in my kitchen. I legitimately cannot. The biggest thing that I want to address first is figuring out what you can outsource. So if that's a bag of cut apples, that's great. If that is food that comes prepared via a food delivery service, that's great too. Figure out what your limits are. So, and there's a whole spectrum here. You can absolutely order prepared meals. If you look into the cost benefits of it, generally it is much cheaper for you to find a local who does in-house food prep, who will then sell you meals at a much lower cost than, say, ordering from Sunbasket or any of the larger food delivery services. You can also look at like components. I use Hungry Root, which calls itself a full prep service, but it's not really. Like, I don't order the meals. I order 5 bags of their salad mix and veggies and sauces so that I can use them in combination with other things that I have planned out. They have cooked chicken and salmon, which for me is worth its weight in gold because I don't have to do that prep ahead of time. So when we're planning it out, you want to account for everybody's food needs. And I've often said I am not a short order cook, but that gets thrown out of the window when you have kids with allergies or you have very demanding children with special needs who will only eat 5 things. So when I am planning meals, typically there is one big meal that most everybody can eat. The rest of it is in components. So I will plan, say, baked chicken that everyone can eat. The small one probably won't eat. I'll have to feed him something else. But then people can make salads, or they can have different kinds of fruit, or there are different types of carbohydrates available. I'll make batches of rice, or I will make batches of mashed potatoes, or I will put all of these side dishes and I will plan around a batch of side dishes that will last us for most of a week, and then a main dish that everyone more or less can eat. And I have to also say here, when it comes to planning, I only cook 3 days a week for the main meals. My oldest daughter takes 2 dinners a week, and my husband takes 2 dinners a week because I am not the only person eating, so I'm not going to be the only person fucking cooking either. And with that said, we have to accommodate for what meals they are planning and skill level. My husband is certainly a more accomplished cook than my daughter, and my daughter at 19 is slowly building her repertoire. So I can say with some experience now, Pinterest has become her best friend. She really uses it a lot to figure out what recipes are appealing to her, and then find and test different things that she can use for, say, her side dishes. So we're working all of this together. Now, planning this fucking sucks. And it's taken me many years to figure out ways to make the planning process not a whole fucking day-long affair. So mostly I use a notebook, just a standard 8x5 gridded, like bullet journal type journal, and I will list all of the base meals and then all of the components. Now I'm also preparing lunches and breakfasts too, and for 5 people. So with breakfast, we've all got options. This week I made myself an egg and vegetable bake thing, and the kids will have cereal, and then my husband will probably have cereal as well. But whatever it is, it's accommodated for the entire week on the menu. And then I have all of the lunch components, and then all of the dinners, except for I allow my husband and daughter to not buy into my super obsessive plan because they work in a grocery store. So I plan out breakfasts and lunches, and then I do all of the prep plus 3 dinners a week. And then they do 2 dinners. Because they work in grocery stores, I allow them to buy their dinners typically the night they work or the day they work, and then they can bring it home. So when we're planning, I'm just planning for the week at large, and then the list goes on the opposite page of the journal. So I have a week's worth of menu planning and then a week's worth of grocery shopping. And because they are in grocery stores every single day, it is, hey, we need this, pick this up, which is not the most elegant way to grocery shop, but it is what works for us right now. And it's really important that when you're planning how you're going to plan your meals, you really work out what is legitimate for you. Do you want to shop every week and be done? Make sure you're accounting for all of the food that you'll need for that week. Is it okay to run back to the store once every couple of days? Fine. Do you want to shop once a month? That takes significantly more planning, and you're going to have 4 weeks worth of meals. So we also plan on a pretty seasonal basis. It is fall. I am rolling out fall menus. That means squash. That means more potatoes. That means baked apples. That means we're introducing the soups back, which I have to admit is one of my favorite parts of fall because it's soup season again. However, soup fatigue is real, so we're still at only 1 soup a week because by February and March, I will be sick to death of eating soup. And I'm not going to want to make it or prep it or eat it, and it'll just sit there and we won't eat it. So this is the other thing that you have to consider when we're talking about meal planning is food waste. You want to make sure that you're only making enough food for the people that are going to eat it and that it actually will get eaten. And this is a fairly complex calculation, which lends itself to meal prep, right? Because a lot of people will just box it up in the to-go containers. There are whole subreddits devoted entirely to what containers to buy and how you should fill them. So your prep then needs to be based on what is most efficient for you over the week. For us, obviously, because we are all home pretty much all of the time, with the exception of my husband and my daughter who work outside of the home, I have to have all of the breakfasts planned. We have to have all of the lunches planned and prepped, and we have all of the side components at least planned and half prepped. We only have the one refrigerator, and there's only so much room. When we're prepping ahead like this, I do not use to-go or the structured containers because there's just simply not enough room for 5 people. So we're prepping into like large batch containers instead. I like quart-sized mason jars for soups and broths and ferments. I like large round bowls for salads and sides, and then I use rectangles in various shapes for pretty much everything else. And then my refrigerator becomes this kind of Jenga where it's a matter of finding the thing and getting it out, which is always probably at least as much time as I spent making the thing in the first place. I cannot lie. But the end result is that everybody has exactly what they want to eat. So we have prepped breakfasts for the week. We have lunches in components so that my husband and daughter can take components and just throw them in a lunch bag when they are getting ready to go to work in the morning. And then the boys and I will build those components out for lunches. Right now, the small one eats a hot dog and a fruit, usually grapes or blueberries, and a carb of some kind, which is not fabulous, but it's the food that he eats. The middle one, who has a much better diet overall, will eat typically chicken nuggets, a slaw of some variety, and then a big bowl of berries. So that's all ready to go, and then I just have to build it, and it takes 2 minutes to do, and we are all eating at lunchtime. The key here for us is that I build out lists of things that everyone will eat, and then when we are building out the plan at the beginning of the week, it's not what's for dinner is the eternal question of our time. No. So when we are building things out, as much of that as possible gets avoided by prepping it and planning it ahead of time. And I have a number of resources for this. It's briarharvey.com/resources. And I have some planners and the templates that I use. So you can absolutely take a look at those if you are interested. Again, I find this to be a very personal thing because what we all eat is incredibly personal. So the more that you can figure out what will work for you and your family and then piece those components together, the easier it becomes to build your own system over time. Alrighty, finally today, I want to talk about the equality of food. Something I talk about a lot is universal basic income and how it is a means of equalizing the problems between the classes. But that's an oversimplification, especially if we're looking at what happens with inflation. If we institute a universal basic income, you can practically guarantee that we will see huge inflation surges overnight because we have all this extra money now, right? So it's not going to matter what's being saved by a UBI in the sense that it will equalize poverty levels. It might work better in a different country, but in the United States of America, a UBI is a waste of time. We are still so stacked towards the top percentage of business and economy that any UBI doesn't benefit the people at the bottom. So a question I have been pondering lately is, what if food was free? What if we could provide food, not housing, that's a different question entirely, but what if we could provide food for all of our citizens? And it becomes a question of, oh, there are so many questions. But the first one that I have been wrestling with comes down to the money of it, right? So the average American spends 13% of their yearly budget on food. That includes eating out, that includes grocery store purchases, that includes cost of manufacture. That's 13% of their budget on food. Food is worth more than $1 trillion in our GDP. And farms alone equal 138 billion of that. Food jobs are 11% of our overall employment, and more than half of those jobs are in food service. So restaurants, bars, etc. Another 20% of what's left or so is in grocery stores and the selling of food. The rest is distributed between manufacture and production. I have a link for all of this that I will share because you damn well better believe I had to look this shit up. So the USDA SNAP expenditure, which is subsidized food for the poorest of us. And SNAP is, God, a nightmare. It's mandated by each individual state. So while there is a cap for what you can be below, each state has their own fund or pool for SNAP benefits. So how much you make and how much you get depends entirely on the state that you live in. It's not even universal for all Americans. The USDA spends more than $100 billion on SNAP, and that's not including individual state contributions. Now, I wanted to put it in perspective because I like to talk about the money side of it, right? If we're looking at gross domestic product, we have to calculate, it's calculated by consumption. So when we're comparing that to a business, we can't compare to a profit. We have to compare to the actual overall revenue, because the profit is the top of line extra at the end. But that's not what a business is made of. It's made of its overall consumption, which its bottom line is in revenue. So if we're comparing the GDP expenditure of $100 billion a year for the poorest of the poor, we have to also look at the gross revenue of Amazon at $280 billion last year. What would it look like if we fed all of our people? What would it take for us to be able to feed our people? I think the answers they're complex and they're more than I have. But I know that there is something here for us to really consider, because food is the great equalizer. If we talk about food and we're talking about what's available when you are poor, and we are limited by those SNAP benefits, and it's a matter of survival, you probably don't have the nutritionally best food available. We're not talking about menu planning here. We're talking about survival. And humans require nutrition to live, yes, but it also powers our brains and enables us to think. And if we look at food as the great equalizer, then what that means is feeding our people would mean that the poorest among us would have the same capacity for critical thought as everyone else. We would be able to look for innovation in every sector. We would be able to see growth on an exponential level if we allowed everyone access to the necessary calories that would be required to fuel their brains and their bodies. Making that work, like I said, I ain't got it. How do you make food free? I don't have any clue. You would have to allot a certain number of calories, perhaps. But then you look at fancy food or the availability of food. How do you take away the monetary attachment to different kinds of food? That doesn't include selling of the food or food in restaurants, which I know many of us do not go to as often anymore, but that cuisine still exists. A steak at a steakhouse is relatively worth more than the steak I burn on my grill, right? But calorically, it counts as the same. So how do we equalize the consumption of food while also removing the fiscal attachment? I don't know. I don't have all these answers, but I like asking the questions. And I think that the more that we explore these kinds of questions and the more that we think about the potential, the more we're going to have the answers at some point in time. And that is what I have for you all today. Thank you very much for watching and or listening. I have been Briar Harvey. If this has benefited you in some way, I would love it if you would buy me a taco. You can do that at ko-fi.com/Briar. That is ko-fi.com/BRIAR. Thank you all so much for being here, and I will see y'all soon. Bye.